Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on Om Times flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandy Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello. Following on from a previous show in which he outlined why spiritual suffering may be at the root of our modern epidemic of metabolic syndrome and other widespread health issues, somatic psychologist Michael Shea returns today to the show to share the latest information about the spiritual function of the vagus nerve and its key role in the mind-body-spirit connection. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Sandy. Always good to be here. Appreciate you.
So I read an article on the BBC Science Focus webpage today that described the vagus nerve as a sort of polymath of the parasympathetic nervous system, getting involved in everything from breathing, heart rate, swallowing, sneezing, digestion, appetite, immune response, body weight, mood, and even orgasm. But I don't think I've heard anyone talk about the role that it plays in nurturing the seeds of spiritual experience. So tell me more about that.
Well, Sandy, you just named all the seeds of spiritual experience. So, we have a body, okay? And our body has an instinct for self-transcendence. It's there from conception. We have form, we have movement. It's incredible that how it functions. And we're finding that the vagus nerve, in terms of how it functions, and as you just named, it's connected to everything in the body. In that way is kind of like the soil. I wouldn't call it the seed. I would call it the soil in which our spiritual experience and our maturation as human beings can take place, because it gives us an inner knowing. It gives us a consciousness. It gives us a voice that we can listen to when we pay attention to it.
People talk about the heart-brain connection. They talk about us having two brains, one in our gut, and one in our head. Is this all to do with the vagus nerve?
Yeah, really, it is. First of all, you and I are going to have this conversation as if they're separate things, but we always have to consider that it's just one thing we're talking about, but how things are connected. And so the vagus nerve is the great connector. In the human embryo, when the vagus nerve develops, its cells, start in the back of the head here. They actually come through the neck. And where do they go first? The lung and the heart. And where do they go next? They go the intestines. And what happens is a certain amount of cells in the intestines, they slough off and they become the enteric nervous system. And those cells create connections to our spinal cord in the back of us to go up to the brain. And the vagus is in front and it's going up the middle of the body to the brain. So think of the vagus nerve as a whole loop in terms of the gut-brain, head-brain connection, that we have the vagus up and down the middle, and the vagus had cells that created the gut-brain, and it goes to the spinal cord up to the brain. So it's a looping where all this information then is shared with the body between the two brains.
Why has it taken us so long to learn about the vagus nerve?
Well, that we could get into a lot of history, and that has to do with neuroscience and what neuroscience is really focused on. Maybe you remember, but in the 1990s, was declared the decade of the brain. And so that's in the 90s when all of this information started. The vagus nerve became very big and very popular right at about 1990 or 91. But it also got lost within the context of all these other brain structures that are incredibly important, because what does the vagus nerve do when it gets to the brain? Well, it has to send signals for sorting things out, such as the physiology of self-preservation. So I need to be able to orient to eating, and I need to be orienting to being able to eliminate waste products. But it also ties into those structures of the brain that are very, very critical on assessing safety. So when we talk about the spiritual component of the vagus nerve, we have to first start with the foundation of the vagus is providing information about our external safety from the people around us and internal safety. So if we're eating junk food and processed food, we're basically causing food trauma, and the vagus nerve is saying, I'm not internally safe, okay? And that really begins to change the way we orient to our own survival and our own healing. It also changes our spiritual practice, and it changes the way in which we orient to our own instinct for self-transcendence.
Is it changing the way that the medical profession is interacting with the human body?
I mean, I talk to a lot of doctors, and the docs we work with, and I would say functional medicine doctors in the United States, and then my wife and I teach at a big alternative cancer clinic in Switzerland. And those doctors are all familiar with the function and role of the parasympathetic nervous system. Not so much the vagus, but the way in which medical doctors learn is through the function of the parasympathetic system, of which the vagus is 75%, but it's not presented that way in medical textbooks. It's presented first in the category of parasympathetic. And then you have to drill down and get into the specific literature, which is now forthcoming. It's incredible in the last 10 years how much has come out about the vagus nerve. But I wouldn't be concerned about a medical doctor knowing about the vagus nerve at this point.
Well, I do wonder whether, they're finally going to understand that we are, you can't just treat the body in isolation. You can't treat bits of the body. We are mind, body, and spirit. And I'm wondering how much of the research is going to make the medical profession reevaluate that, because they've kind of ignored that.
Well, and that's where we get into the spirituality of the vagus nerve, because what's happening with the research on the vagus nerve is it's entering the domain of the research on compassion. So the Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science that came out like 8 or 9 years ago has a beautiful article on the vagus nerve and why it's important in spiritual practice, and how the vagus nerve gets activated in contemplative practices to generate compassion. Now, take that little snippet, and we see that there's several medical schools, one in particular in California, that just got a huge funding 2 years ago to start a school of compassion. So yes, it's very slowly entering into the medical community from the domain of the compassion research. And there's a lot of compassion research. This Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science, and now there's other prestigious books that are like $300 a piece to buy. But that's what the medical community needs, and it is starting, and it's very slow.
There's a lot of research lately on altruism and how, people who are altruistic and generous actually live longer and are healthier. So, again, it's the same kind of thing as compassion, isn't it?
Well, altruism is kind of the end result of the spiritual path. So if you could say that, in life we have spiritual formation, where we have a spiritual being, when we're a child, and we have different ways of relating to our spiritual process. And then there's the spiritual maturation that goes on, over time. So it's very important to appreciate the developmental aspect of that and compassion, but it requires contemplative practices. This is what the research now is pointing to, that in order to link together, let's say, compassion with the vagus nerve with spiritual maturation, we need to have be in the domain of contemplative practices. And so we have the new named field of contemplative neuroscience. And the vagus nerve is in its function is really influencing that. So this is a very big part of the relationship between spirituality and the vagus nerve and compassion in general. But altruism is the maturation. You don't start that way. Well, actually you do at a metabolic level. And I don't want to get into that, but the altruism really is based on oneself first. You have to understand compassion and therefore the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve is giving you a lot of information on what's going on inside your body. You've got to have compassion for yourself first. You've got to really take care of yourself. You've got to be your own caregiver. It's extremely difficult. Let's not use negatives. It's very difficult to care for another person if you don't know how to care for yourself. It's called compassion burnout. Compassion fatigue now is big in the helping professions. I had a year of training as a multi-faith chaplain, and it was very, very big. I just didn't want to get placed in a hospital and have to deal with that level of distress, which is constant. So you have to take care of yourself. So in terms of compassion and altruism, you have to be altruistic to yourself. That is, as you may know, very difficult to learn. It took me a long time to learn that. And I'm still working with that because I'm in the helping profession. So already this morning, I've done a consult on quite some time with a patient with breast cancer and just the horror of having going through that process and getting ready for the surgery tomorrow. So it's around us all the time. And this afternoon, when we finish, I'm going to take a break and go to the beach because I need time away from that level of giving and caring and being compassionate and taking care of myself.
So with all the research that's emerging and with this knowledge that, we've got to be, contemplative practice is so important. Is that kind of throwing a bit of shade on all of the devices that are suddenly coming on the market, to rebalance your vagus nerve?
I hate to say this, but there was a journalist in the late 1800s, Ambrose Bierce, and he said, nobody ever lost a fortune underestimating the stupidity of the American public. I'm not saying these devices don't have value because those devices come out of research literature on a function of the vagus nerve in which the vagus nerve can create anti-inflammatory signaling. You want to have that for your healing process. So there are ways that you can electrically stimulate it. It was based on research where they would surgically implant a device by the vagus nerve. It comes real close to the surface right here by your collarbone. And then you could just pass a device over it and it would stimulate the vagus nerve and create an anti-inflammatory response for patients with multiple sclerosis, with MS. Now, on the internet, you can buy it anywhere and you can put it on your ears because that's what you do. And you go from there. And to stimulate your vagus nerve, most everyone has inflammatory processes going on. So the whole idea here with the vagus nerve and contemplative practices, because it's trending right now. I have in the past 3 or 4 months, I have seen more books come into my practice right now that are integrating polyvagal theory and vagus nerve into contemplative practices, especially yoga. That's really big. In the Compassion Science book, the chanting is really good. And why is that? It's because the immediate association with whether you buy a device to stimulate your vagus nerve, the easiest way to stimulate your vagus nerve is to breathe. So your inhalation goes into your abdomen and your exhalation is slow. So if you've been to a yoga class and you do chanting, you see that, oh my goodness, yes, I'm chanting. It's a very slow exhalation. That raises vagal tone, which then increases your capacity to calm your heart and experience joy and happiness, which is the original function of the parasympathetic system. This is in the neurological literature. The vagus nerve is built for happiness, joy, and bliss. And it's got a default state. And that default state is stress, inflammation, disease process, all of it, what's going on. That's the default. And with contemplative practices, we can start reorienting the vagus nerve to its original functionality, joy, happiness, and so forth, compassion, and the spiritual path, if we want to call it that.
It's interesting because, when we look at things like spontaneous healing in people who've been given, life-altering diagnoses, a lot of people say that what helped them heal their bodies was meditation or visualization or something that they undertook to calm their system. So
Right.
They're working on the vagus nerve.
They're working on the vagus nerve, and that comes within that whole domain of contemplative neuroscience. And there's a whole lot of different ways in which that happens. And Sandy, the thing is with the spirituality component is that all of these experiences that we're trying to induce with contemplative practices, they are already occurring naturally. You and I had some correspondence about this new book that's coming out on it just came out, and I've been reading it, on the new science of awe. That anytime we can be walking around and all of a sudden see something beautiful, and what happens is we get into a very spacious, open awareness that relaxes us, that creates a type of open attention to something larger or deeper within ourselves that's already there, and we're just remembering it. It's innate. It's built into us. It's critical to understand that component of that we have this self-healing capacity that's generated from within the vagus nerve and our state of mind.
Yeah, I mean, awe is, it is appreciation. It is gratitude. It is all the things that we've been told about for a long, long time that we need to, cultivate.
Right. Well, and the thing is that, again, the point being that we need to recultivate them because they're innate. Compassion is innate. It's within us. I mean, from religious perspectives and spiritual perspectives, they all will say it's in the heart, and I get that because the vagus nerve, when its tone is correct and really a high tone, which means you have really low stress, you have the innate automatic compassion responsiveness. You don't have to generate compassion responsiveness. It's there and it will happen naturally. However, contemplative practices are necessary in order to, what's the best way to help that process mature, or, as they say, to make sure the soil is fertile for that seed of compassion to continue to grow. Very, very critical.
Well, it's very timely, isn't it? Because, I mean, what are we looking at in the world? People are angry. People are depressed. People are in fear. People are, dividing. There's so much division going on, and people are staying away from each other. And, very easy to raise people's tempers and their hatred of things that they don't even know about. What we need is exactly this.
Well, we need, yes, we need to calm down. we need, anger and hatred are the most cardiotoxic emotions that there are, but we can calm down, with contemplative practices. But we also have, remember, the capacity with some of these contemplative practices, and especially Eastern meditation, that it's our mind and our thoughts that are creating this distress. So, for instance, when I read world news, and I don't read a lot of it, my wife and I have turned off the TV, but I like to stay informed because I'm ex-military and I want to know what's going on because I made a commitment that I could be called up anytime. I was a military officer, and that means anytime in my lifetime I can be called up. Not that I'm going to be called up, but the point is that I want to pay attention, but I don't drill down in it. And I realize that it's the way I think about things. Is this really a polarization that's going on? Or is this just the way the world has functioned from the beginning? There has always been war. There has always been trauma. And there's always been attempts to overcome it. It seems to be like some type of balance is always operating within the world. And so part of that is being able to see anger and rage and this incredible, I completely agree, this incredible division that we see on the planet right now. But we also have to tone down our thoughts about it and our participation and our taking sides with it. So that's a mental function that is also going to help the vagus nerve, but we're also going to need other processes where the vagus nerve interacts with our body. Okay, so we've got the mental component that we have to calm down and see the world more holistically as one thing. And then we've got the body upset that's happening that the vagus nerve is also functioning with. So the vagus nerve is related to both of those. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I want to just digress very slightly because something occurred to me today when I was looking over some notes from previous conversations you and I had. And you had said that a study suggested that respiratory symptoms related to long COVID may not be a result of direct injury to the lungs, but rather to the vagus nerve. And that made me think about the vagus nerve. It made me think about the anxiety and the anger and the fear that has been getting worse since the COVID pandemic. And I wondered whether there was a connection there.
Well, as I think I said earlier, the vagus nerve is responsible for informing us of whether we're safe or not. And so initially, the initial research was, do I feel safe with the people I'm around? But when we start getting into an interpersonal dynamic, do I feel safe emotionally with the people I'm around? And so that's the function of how the vagus works in the heart. When you get down to the gut, it's does my body feel safe? Just my whole body. When you're eating junk food and you've got an inflamed intestine, and 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically unhealthy, which means their intestines are metabolically unhealthy, they are not feeling safe. How does that manifest? Well, we hear terms like brain fog. I've got brain fog. I can't think right. I fly off the handle real easily. So we see that over perhaps 150 psychological diagnoses now are directly related to the gut microbiome, and that's where the vagus nerve hooks in. So what I'm saying here is people aren't feeling safe internally in their body. And for whatever reason, changes need to happen, but you're not going to get there with a contemplative practice. You're going to get there with your knife and fork, folks, and you gotta, and in your kitchen. I'm calling the kitchen the new ER. So we've got to take better care of ourselves. And when we do that, that's part of our spiritual maturation. We're taking care of our body. And this is a critical component, because if we're not feeling safe, you can't function in the world. You buy into the worldview of no safety. Okay, that's what these headlines are saying. You're not safe. You're not safe. It's the food we're eating that's not safe. It's the thoughts that we're thinking that aren't safe. And there are ways that we can take care and manage that ourselves. It's vital. These are civilizational issues. Our civilization now is at a crux. Okay. And there's been an enormous amount of loss. I just saw a statistic yesterday that 1.4 million people died of COVID from undiagnosed high blood pressure. Okay. And what this means is that the level of the clients that are coming in to see me are dealing with constant loss. They've lost friends, family, they've lost loved ones. So there's a constant grieving process that's underneath. And I think that's the edge that I'm working towards, especially in my new book, is to let's take care of the food trauma and getting our body feeling safe, but also really, really let's take care of the bigger picture here that's necessary with taking care of our body and our mind. It's incredibly valuable. And we can do that. We can control that.
Well, I think it's so important that, all of this new research is emerging now, because we really do need to take to do something and turn the tide. We have to do that. But we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and my guest today is Somatic Psychologist and founding board member of the Biodynamic Craniosacral Therapy Association of North America, Michael J. Shea. And we're talking about the role the vagus nerve plays in the mind-body-spirit connection and why the spiritual path is humanity's only way forward. We'll be back with more in a few moments. Stay tuned.
Home Times TV.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Times flagship radio show What is Going On, and as an author, editor and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who've walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees and no BS, just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene keys is basically the code book of life. In the gene keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Michael Shea. Interesting that Richard Rudd was just talking about the contemplative way being the inner way.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And, so many of these religious traditions and spiritual traditions, they have spiritual maps. If you start here with this practice and then you go to this practice, you end up with this practice. Buddhism has it, Hinduism has it, Sufism has it. It's beautiful. So there's maps out there, but the main map is the heart and following your own heart and really following your own destiny. as you go through the process of maturing as a human being, and then maturing as a really full spiritual human being.
Well, what about religion? I mean, you've talked about a lot of Eastern practices there. There's an awful lot of religious practices that really do not, connect the body with the spirit.
Well, part of the problem with that, Sandy, is that there's some research literature pointing out that repetitive spiritual practice, so repetitive praying, like saying the rosary, or different repetitive forms of religious practices aren't valuable at all. They don't really help. Okay. So here's what's happening. I read that, and I was raised Catholic. Okay. And then I went into a phase of atheism. And then from atheism, had a devastating experience in the military and converted to Buddhism. Converted is a really interesting word, but I thought I became a Buddhist. And now I'm trying to not identify with any particular, religion in general. And I've had a recovery around my own Catholicism. So how is that possible? Well, the contemplative neuroscience, in all of these religions, there's contemplations. And one of the things that's happened is that I've got contemplations that I do as a Buddhist practice. I've got a yoga certification from the local yoga studio. So I love the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the 8 limbs of yoga. And so I teach a class on Pratyahara yoga, the turning inward of the senses. But I've also had a recovery around my Catholicism in the sense that I am doing different contemplations. So, for example, last year, when I wrote the book that is coming out next year on the heart, I did a contemplation on the 7 sorrows of Mary. So, and I'm actually looking at over here an icon from Greece that I got showing 7 swords going through Mary's heart. And that goes back to the discussion we had a couple of minutes ago about loss and grief, that we are in the age of loss and grief. We need to start acknowledging that. But then I had a knee injury in the fall. Actually, was it in the fall? Something like that. And it really bothered me. And I had to travel internationally. And I decided to contemplate the 5 wounds of Jesus as a way of managing, walking slowly and just imagining, that there had been nails going through my feet and so forth. And it really helped calm me and reduce the pain. Point being that all religions have contemplative practices that can be really, really valuable, and get you closer to your own sense of spiritual maturation and your own sense of spiritual authority. It's your spiritual authority and how and where that lives, especially in your heart.
But for somebody who has not had a religious upbringing, doesn't do yoga, doesn't do much in the way of meditation, where would they begin?
Sandy, anything can be considered a meditation. So I'd actually have to sit down with such a person because, for example, as being trained as a multi-faith chaplain, they say sometimes an atheist that's dying will call you into the room because they want to talk. And you go, what are you going to talk about if you can't talk about God or Jesus or whatever? You can talk about love. You can talk about your experiences of how you felt and experienced love in your life, your loved ones, whether you were married, whether you had kids, whether you were lucky at love, whether you were unlucky at love, your experiences of happiness. What are your regrets in life? Finding out, most people have a lot of regrets on their deathbed. It's unbelievable. So these are for an atheist, even, these are conversations that you can have. Sleeping is a meditation. Walking is a meditation. So it doesn't have to be a formal contemplative practice. The issue is whether or not someone is anxious or depressed, given their lifestyle. But, Krishna, there's a funny expression in Hinduism I like a lot, and I say it in class sometimes. And it has to do with Krishna. Krishna says, if you want to follow the spiritual path, I will give you the tools to follow the spiritual path. Krishna also says, if you do not want to follow the spiritual path, I will give you the tools to not follow the spiritual path. So it's all spiritual path. I had to have 20 years of atheism And it really upset my wife, the way I was bashing, especially Christianity. And it really upsetting because she's a minister. And it's like, it's like, here we are. So it was a marriage issue. But the point is, it was something I had to overcome, because I see now more the notion of love, of kindness, of no regret, of being impartial, all of these things that are the seeds in the soil for altruism, so that we can extend that to everyone.
Your next book, as you just mentioned, the Biodynamic Heart, Somatic Compassion Practices for a Clear and Vital Heart. Tell me about some of these practices.
Well, the practice has to do, in the first section of the book, is I really address the notion of loss and what's happened in our culture. And so it's really the practices of being able to acknowledge loss, and to be able to support each other in grief. I'm reading, my wife and I do a lot of reading now on grief, and I've actually got a set of cards, these 52 cards I just got from Wisdom Publications. They're beautiful contemplations about grief and so forth. And it's being able to really get into the notion of loss and grief and integrate that, as part of our spiritual practice. But then it gets into my own particular autobiographical dynamic associated with the terrorist bombing attack that I was in the military. And then my own spiritual path, telling people, your way is your way. Here was my way. And it was very irregular. The path is very irregular. And it's really going to be your path, and finding support for your particular path. And then I get into the different dynamics, especially associated with the instincts. You and I have had a conversation about the vagus and the metabolism of the human body and the disruption of the metabolism. Metabolism is linked to our instincts, just like physiology is linked to our anatomy. So the book gets into a very detailed discussion of the science of interoceptive awareness and how we can feel the vagus, how we can feel when we're hungry, how we can feel when we're full, but especially what's called cardioception, the neuroscience, the science of feeling our heartbeat. So the main meditation that I do with the vagus nerve is to breathe and then feel my heartbeat, because heartbeat, when you're consciously aware of your heartbeat, initiates the instinct for self-transcendence and is directly linked to empathy. So over 20 years now of research on empathy, the more you can feel your heartbeat and really sink into your heartbeat, the more you can avoid trauma, the more you can change your behavior, the more you can influence vagal tone, and the more you can promote empathy and compassion as the basis and the remembering of how that lives in our heart and how we can be with other people that way. That's the key point for me with the book. The last part of the book, Sandy, are all the hand positions that I've developed for the cardiovascular system. So I'm a manual therapist, and I apply the craniosacral therapy to the cardiovascular system. And I take it towards the mystical edge of the dynamic, because in the history of osteopathic literature, starting in the middle of the 1800s, many of these manual therapists and osteopaths were mystics. My main mentor, an osteopath, very, very mystical person. And so I teach that component in the last, where our hands are a ministry. This is a spiritual ministry. The heart meridian has a point here, and you can visualize beams of light coming out of that while you're healing or having your hands on people. So I teach these visualization practices, and also how to engage the cardiovascular system with visualization, with movement, with touch and kindness, in order to facilitate the instinct for self-healing and the instinct for self-transcendence. Now it's a big book, 500 images, 500 images. It's the biggest thing I've ever done. Of the 9 books I've done, this is the biggest one.
Well, I mean, it sounds like a really interesting book too.
Oh, I love it. And I'm in conversation now, because it's coming back to me next month, for the final edit, and I'll have like 200 or 300 edits that I'll have to do and really integrate everything that I've learned since I finished writing it a year ago. So I'm happy about it. I'm very happy because it's about the heart, and that's my spiritual path, the vagus nerve. And yeah.
Well, you know, and you think about the hands, and I immediately think about Reiki practitioners, you know, who are using their hands to feel the energy around the body. And I've had experiences with incredible, you know, hands-on and hands-off healers where I have literally felt the heat coming out of their hands. You know, so is this something we can do for ourselves? You know, with these pictures in your book, can we, you know, work on our own body?
Oh yeah, absolutely. What I teach is, you know, it's very simple. It's all on the internet anyway. So it's first of all to get into a place where I place my left hand over my heart and then my right hand over my belly, where the vagus nerve ends just below the umbilicus. And then I just do breathing. I just breathe into my hand in my belly and then long exhalations, and I just start settling myself. Once I do that, I tune into my heartbeat and I start feeling my heartbeat. And what I do with that is I'll recite a prayer or a poem that I've memorized in the cadence of my heartbeat in order to increase empathy. And then once I do that, then I start visualizing different colors. So I like to teach visualizing, and then the book is what I teach, is visualizing the heart being white, and then visualizing the heart being blue, and then yellow, and then red, and then green, and then letting it grow from there. Those are the 5 primary spiritual colors in Tibetan medicine, because I've studied Tibetan medicine for 40 years. So it's the breathing, and then it's the interoceptive awareness of heartbeat, and then it's visualizing the heart as the different colors, and then letting that come alive, because there's a point at which you deliberately visualize, let's say, these colors, and then there's a moment at which the vagus nerve and everything kind of comes together and it comes alive. Your rainbow body comes alive, and it's a very deep spiritual process. And at that point, you're given information. You're talking to your higher self, I guess you could say, or your deeper self, if you're inclined to think more along the Buddhist lines. So that's just the simplistic, and I wrote a whole book about it, but that's the simplest instructions right now for whoever's listening to this. It's easy.
What about the chakras? You know, where do they come into this? Because you could also be visualizing the chakras, couldn't you?
Well, what happens is that when you visualize your heart as the 5 colors, you're actually visualizing the 5 colors of the heart chakra. In different systems, even in Hinduism and in Buddhism, different schools have different colors for everything, including the chakras. But I will say that the heart chakra is the most important chakra within that system. Now, that being said, the reason these visualizations are important is because they affect the subtle body, and they will wake up and they will stimulate, especially the heart chakra. That's the main one that I'm interested in. And I do have a spiritual practice where I do work and visualize the other chakras. But anybody listening to this, it's the sum total is always going to be about the heart and the importance of visualizing the heart. Sandy, the reason why this is important is that you're activating biophotons. When you do these color visualizations, all cells in the human body secrete, or they don't secrete, they emit colors, they emit biophotons. This means that when you visualize the subtle body, as I've just described, whether it's a chakra or not, you can positively affect and change the metabolism of your body. This is why I'm teaching it. So in other words, you go into your subtle body for visualization in order to heal the cells of our body at a metabolic level, because this is the disease du jour that we have in our culture. We are metabolically unhealthy human beings now. And by visualizing, especially these colors and which becomes an activation of the chakras, wow, our metabolism changed. I've been teaching this for several years in Europe. We've seen it over and over again. My teachers in training have seen it over and over again. We've got to have different ways, Sandy, to affect the metabolism of our body. Yes, I talked about diet, nutrition, and all that. Yes, exceedingly important. But we've got to have a contemplative practice that affects the vagus nerve and affects our metabolism. So that's what the book is primarily about.
So when you talk about aligning the metabolism with the cosmos, this is what you
Yes, right. Well, when we talk about spiritual process and we talk about the vagus nerve, when we see, you and I at the beginning, we talked about this incredible polarity that we see in the culture right now. But one of the things that happens, the more spiritual practice that you do, is you become altruistic. Yes, you feel more connected to another person and to groups of people, and you feel really bad that a lot of people just died in a big bombing somewhere in the Ukraine. Yeah, I get all that. And at the same time, the new science of awe, and it's not new science, is the idea that we get connected all the way through to the center of the earth, through our body, all the way to the North Star, if you're in Taoism, but we get connected to a larger universe. So we want to feel that total connection of one thing, or openness to one thing. So that's the dynamic with the cosmology of feeling one with the universe. There's that old Dalai Lama joke about the hot dog vendor.
I don't know that.
Oh, God.
I don't mix with the Dalai Lama.
Pardon?
I don't mix with the Dalai Lama. I know you've got a connection.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like the Dalai Lama. It's a good message, but it's that whole joke of make me one with everything. The Dalai Lama goes to the hot dog vendor, because when you go to a hot dog vendor on Coney Island, you say to the vendor, make me one with everything, the ketchup, the mustard, the relish, and everything. And when the Dalai Lama says, make me one with everything, it means make me one with the universe. So it's a funny little joke.
Yes.
The Dalai Lama doesn't understand that joke. Somebody in Australia told him that joke on live TV, and he looked at them like they were crazy. Okay.
So what you're saying is, I mean, we tend to think there's a lot of phrases that are bandied around, and people say that, we all have the capability to heal the suffering of the world. And we think, yeah, but what does that actually mean? You're talking that we literally have the ability by doing the contemplation, by connecting with our heart, we
Right.
literally have the ability to heal the suffering of the world.
We have the capacity to heal the suffering of the world by the way in which we perceive it, and whether it is a very disconnected mess or whether there's part of a larger plan. And so, or we just finally give in, Sandy. We finally give in. This is a mystery that I cannot understand. And I accept this mystery. Acceptance therapy is very popular now. So I accept this mystery, and I no longer have to be so upset and concerned about it because it's a mystery. And I know there's people working on trying to help. And the way I can help is by not getting upset and getting emotionally distraught about it. When I don't have to get distraught and emotionally upset, I can heal the world, because I see the world as one thing, as an interconnected whole. And I accept that it's a mystery. I can't solve it. You can enter a mystery, you can't solve it. So I know you and I are living in a mystery, and it's a big mystery, and we need tools to navigate that mystery within ourselves and to reduce the toxicity of hatred and anger, and really see the interconnectedness of all of it.
Well, yeah, and we know that the spiritual path is the only way forward. We have to embrace that.
Yeah, and again, earlier we talked about, and that's the problem, with the medical community. Back in the Renaissance, the Catholic Church cut a deal in Paris with the medical authorities, and they just said, look, you take the body, we take the spirit. You don't get to have the spirit anymore. And we've been paying a heavy price for that. Sandy, we've been paying a really big time heavy price for that. And so my work and the work of all the people I know and am with is to bring back a spiritual understanding and integration, that we are a unit of function of mind, body, and spirit, which we've been told forever. But we have to realize that, and we can realize that when we raise vagal tone, when we have compassion practices and contemplative practices that allow us to really nurture that seed in soil, that it will bear the fruit of inner realization of one thing and non-duality, and also that one thing of altruism, of really, I need to be more kind. I need to be more kind to the people I'm around, to my wife, to my community, wherever I can be more kind.
Absolutely. So how long have you been working on this book? Sounds like a long project.
Sandy, it's interesting you say that, and thank you for asking that, because I started writing this book 20 years ago, and it took like 4 or 5 years, and I was working on it with my sister, and we got a contract from a big time publisher, and then it went through the editorial process, and something triggered the publisher, and they canceled the contract. So it just sat. It sat for a long time, and then COVID started, and my previous publisher at North Atlantic Books had moved to Inner Traditions, my current publisher, and out of the clear blue, he writes me and he says, "Do you have any books we can do?" And I said, "Yeah, I got 2," because with the COVID, my cohort of students and so forth said, "You've got to write about the immune system." So that's my current book, is the Biodynamics of the Immune System. And I really wanted the heart one done, but they said, "No, we'll do the immune system because of COVID and blah, blah, blah." But so then finally they said, "Yes, we'll give you a contract for the heart book." And that's really where I'm at right now. It's the fruition of 20 years of contemplation and writing about the heart and looking at research literature, the vagus nerve, all of the things that we've just talked about. It's a fruitional piece for me because I really feel it's important to shift the whole discussion and dynamic of how we heal the body, how we heal ourselves, and how we integrate the spiritual component. And how easy that is. It's an aptitude that's different for you. It's different for me. I've got practices that I've learned, that I've rejected. They don't work for me, but now I've got the ones that do work for me. It's trial and error. You've got to keep going, whoever you are that's on the spiritual path.
I would imagine in that 20-year period where the book was sitting, the science, I mean, you had to go back and revisit it because the science has changed so much.
Oh, it's amazing. And then all of a sudden you get compassion science. So you have all the science on empathy, all the science now on compassion, and that's going to be integrated, into medical schools and so forth. So, and you've got loads of literature now, research literature on gratitude, all of these things. It's just incredible. And yet we have to remember, Sandy, it's innate. It's there. It's already built in. And these practices allow us to remember it, to recover it, to recognize it, and to nurture it. We have to sweep our garden, as they say in Zen, and nurture this possibility. So it's a beautiful time we're in. I think this is a beautiful time we're in.
Agreed. 500 pages is, a lot, not for someone like me who devours books, but for a lot of people. What are you doing to help those who might be intimidated by such a big book? Are you offering free events? Are you, online, etc.?
Yeah. Well, Sandy, that may be the way you and I got connected, because my first publisher, and I did 6 books with them, never assigned me a publicist. So I write a book, And bingo, I'm on to the next one. I don't even promote it, because bookstores in talking at bookstores was fading out at that point in time. So I write the immune system book, and introduction says, we've assigned you a publicist. You are now going to be given podcasts and all sorts of things to promote your book. And I'm an introvert, and I'm like, oh my God, I've got to promote myself. So I had to begin learning how to promote myself. And the first 2 or 3 interviews were like, it's like, because I'm not a good salesperson. But at any rate, I learned to be able to talk about the book from the perspective of altruism and self-compassion, and really how to help ourselves. So I've been assigned a publicist, and as soon as this next book comes out, there'll be a whole other round. And actually, I've already lined up a number of podcasts and interviews and so forth, because I'm actually enjoying the process. I'm really enjoying the process, and I want to thank you.
Passionate about it, and that comes across. And you don't need to have anything else other than passion for what you're talking about. When is it going to be published?
The publisher just told me last week that it'll actually be a year from now in August. And with the immune book, I went, no, we've got to get it out now. People are sick, people are dying. And I realized when the book came out, it's getting worse. It doesn't make any difference. So, and Sandy, there's a lot of good books coming out now. There's a lot of good books coming out on the vagus nerve and contemplative practices and so forth. So, and especially with a focus on the cardiovascular system and heart. So I'm part of a trend that's happening, and I'm really enjoying being a part of that worldwide international trend.
I'm going to have to cut you there, Michael, because we are almost out of time.
Oh, okay.
But thank you so much for joining us. I'll look forward to that book. We'll have you on the show when it comes out. And we'll talk again.
Okay. Thank you, Sandy.
Thanks. Michael's book, Biodynamics of the Immune System, Balancing the Energies of the Body with the Cosmos, and his new book, The Biodynamic Heart, published by Inner Traditions. That's it for today. That's all we've got time for. I'll be back at the same time next week. Thank you, Michael Shea.
Thank you, Sandy. Pleasure.